Thank you for watching CannabisCMO, presented by New Frontier Data. You can check them out at newfrontierdata.com. And mahalo to our other sponsors, Cannabis Media, Indiva Advisors, High Day, and MJ Unpacked. You can check out our show notes with links in the description for all of their websites, and be sure to thank them for supporting our show. Aloha, everybody. Welcome back. My name is Kaliko Castillo, co-founder of Thunderstorm Strategies, and your host here at CannabisCMO, your go-to source for insights and strategies on marketing in the cannabis industry. Whether you're a brand, an agency, or professional working in the industry, our goal is to help you navigate the unique challenges and opportunities of promoting cannabis products and services. Each week, we'll bring you expert guests, industry news, and actionable tips on topics like branding, social media, content marketing, and more. So if you want to stay ahead of the game and grow your business in the cannabis space, make sure you're following along by subscribing to our Substack newsletter, which comes out every week at cannabiscmo.substack.com. You can follow us on LinkedIn or subscribe to us on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Now, let's get into the show. On today's show, we have Doc Collins from the Hood Collective, who spent more than a decade in corporate PR, working with clients such as GM, Amazon Web Services, and Microsoft Research. He's now spent the last 8 years in the world of video and online marketing, focusing on content creation, social media strategy, and branding. In 2017, he co-founded the Hood Collective, based out here in Portland, Oregon, but bi-coastal, and has focused exclusively on the cannabis industry ever since. Doc, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. It's great that you're doing this.
Yeah, very much appreciated, and appreciate the work that you've been doing. I was able to look at your guys' website and see some of the awesome clients that you guys have worked with over the years. So it definitely seems like you guys are helping people be able to professionalize the industry and really help bring branding to the next level. But would love to sort of just jump in and maybe talk a little bit about your background, knowing that you did some work in the sort of corporate world and now are working exclusively in the cannabis industry. Can you tell us a little bit about your sort of marketing journey and how you ended up coming to start the Hood Collective?
Yeah, sure. So, like the bulk of my, before I lived in Portland, I lived in Beijing, China for over a decade. And typical of expats over there, start out as an English teacher, but at some point start working with a local PR company, but all of their clients were big multinational companies. And not just American companies either, a lot of European companies, some Australian companies. So what was really interesting and what I think, kind of was a great jumpstart to my career was when you work as an expat in one of these overseas companies, whether it's a local company or a multinational PR marketing company, there isn't the same, slow ramp up where you start as an intern, or even if you're starting as an intern and you're just like making copies or getting like they don't have time for that. Like when you're there, you're probably one of the only native English speakers. I was the only native English speaker at my company. So you were just thrust in and you're just doing everything that they needed right from the beginning. So I learned a lot and it was exciting but it wasn't like PR was not what I wanted to do with my life. And I had gone to film school. And so by the end of my time in China, I'd started working on my own like video productions, doing a bunch of different stuff. And so when I moved back to the States, I knew I wanted to focus on that. And so when I moved to Portland, I found Artem, the person I started Hood Collective with. We kind of found each other because we both wanted to do the same thing. And he had a complementary background. He had gone to school for animation and had a really strong art, graphic design background. And so we decided to team up. And at first, we're just taking whatever jobs we could get. And along the way, got a couple of cannabis jobs. And people were like, oh, it's the green rush. And this was like late 2016, early 2017, around when this was happening. And they're like, it's the green rush. People have duffel bags full of cash put in the bank. They don't know what to do with it. And we're like, wow, this this sounds amazing. And so we started the Hood Collective. And so right when we started, it was late 2017, and that's right when that first crash happened. So it was kind of a rude awakening. So that's how we got started.
Well, I mean, trial by fire, and people
Yeah.
always say if you can make it when things are the toughest, you can make it at any time, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's probably a good time to have gotten in.
I actually think we were lucky that way, because we didn't, like, if we got fat on, the early days when the crash hit, we would have been like, we would. I don't think we would still be around.
Well, I think it's interesting too, knowing that you're here in Oregon and kind of came up when that market was going through its crash, but we see this cycle happening across the country, right? So like also as a marketer, you can sort of see ahead of the game for a lot of people who are opening up in these new markets and kind of see how, until we have a fully nationalized marketplaces, a lot of these markets are going to go through that same sort of boom and bust cycle. So to really be prepared for that and be able to kind of work with people given those particular challenges, I think that's a super important sort of experience to be working with as well.
It's 100% true. And like, we're working right now on like starting a new campaign for ourselves of kind of an educational / self-promotion campaign, really focused on new states. And it's really important to me because I just don't want to see people make the same mistakes and you're just, like you said, it's the same cycle every time this new state comes online. People think it's going to be like this the whole time, and then it all falls apart. And I want to like really get to these, companies before they launch and be like, hey, you need to be prepared, and you need to build out your brand, and you need to figure out what your marketing strategy is before you launch. And with the, it's not always going to be, just money coming in hand over fist. What's going to carry you through is that strong brand and building those assets from the beginning. And too often people, like, it just breaks my heart because too many companies are coming to us and being like, oh, we were doing so well, and it's just kind of falling off a cliff, or we're struggling, we don't know what to do. And I look at what they have, and it's just like they didn't invest in their brand to begin with, and now they want to be saved, but they don't have money to spend. And it's like, it's too late. I can't. You needed to do it from the beginning. And so that's why we're going to be trying to get out that message. And I'm glad that you're getting out the message. And just like, you have to build a sustainable company before you launch, because this industry is brutal.
Oh yeah, no, without a doubt. And I think one of the things I hit on constantly as a theme here is that like we're all in the education business, right? It doesn't matter what part of the industry you're in. So this kind of need to educate, potential brand operators about like what are the things that you don't know before you sort of get into the game. I'm kind of curious, like how does the Hood Collective like kind of approach content strategy, differently in cannabis than you would have in sort of a normal traditional place where you would have had kind of all the resources you could have needed to marshal to have a strategic plan. Like what are some of the things that like, how do you approach that when you're working with folks here in the cannabis industry?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I don't think of it as like not having the resources, although probably, I mean, because just as a side note, we did have one non-cannabis corporate client this past year, just because we'd worked with the person that hired us, we'd worked with at 2 different cannabis companies, and then she left cannabis to this tech company. And so she brought us on just because we'd worked together twice before. And it was like, oh my God, they have so much money to spend. They just have they're just wasting so much money because it just doesn't mean the same thing to them as it does to cannabis clients. So that was ironic and funny to me. But what I see as the real constraints is not the money and the resources, because all the people you're competing with are in a similar boat, until it goes federal and the really big money comes in, it's still that opportunity of, you don't have to have this huge corporation backing you to make it. You just have to be smart. To me, what is the limiting factor is the channels where you can advertise are so limited. You're not able to do the same things that you're able to do in almost any other industry. You can't do paid ads on social. You can't run Google ads. And I know it's starting to change, and there's people that are working on workarounds, and so there's some ways to bypass these restrictions, but I find it still really hit and miss. And so what we recommend and what we focus on is building a strong brand and focusing on organic reach, whether it's SEO, social, doing it without just throwing money at the problem. And so it forces you to be creative. It forces you to really focus on who you are and how you're representing yourself in the market. And I think anyone that is thinking of getting into the industry or is looking to rebrand, those are the questions you have to be asking. Who are you? What are you providing that makes you different from what everyone else is providing? How are you differentiating yourselves? And how are you doing it in an authentic way?
Yeah, that's great stuff. And I think you're just kind of starting to touch into it there. But I feel like a lot of the times it's really kind of helping businesses and brands understand what are the storylines that live inside of their business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Being like a filmmaker and being someone who's about storytelling, can you talk a little bit about sort of the need to kind of tell the story behind your brands as the differentiator from other sort of competing brands?
Yeah, I obviously, if you've done this a while, storytelling, telling your story, it's a buzzword, it's a platitude. You go to any marketing site, they're going to be talking about how they're going to tell your story. But I approach it in a very practical way, in that you have to ask yourself, what is it that your customer wants to know? And too often people approach it from, oh, this is what I want to tell them. This is what I think is important. This is what I think separates us. And very often, what they're landing on is really not different. It's the same thing everyone else is saying. And too often, it's not what people care about. And so the first thing you have to figure out when you're trying to sell yourselves is, what is it that what is it that your customer is going to take away? What is it that they care about? And if you don't know who your customers are, if you don't know what the market is, that makes it more difficult. And the thing of it is that the people that, and I'm sure it's the same for you, when you're working with people in the cannabis industry, it's usually people that have been doing it for a lot longer than it's been legal, right? They are legacy growers, and so they have a tremendous understanding of the plant, of the science, of the real benefits and the real community that has built up around this plant for decades, and they're steeped in it. But what they're not great at is communicating that, or understanding, that when you are within this, when you are in the illicit market, it was a lot. You didn't have the same kind of competition, and you weren't. There's a lot of people that just wouldn't have considered it. And so if we want to grow this industry, we have to reach these people that were anti-cannabis, cannabis skeptical, maybe dabbled in it as when they were younger, but for any number of reasons were like not in, didn't really become heavy consumers because it was illegal, because it was frowned upon, because of whatever it was. This is the people that, if we want to grow the industry, these are the people we have to reach. And so the same things that, all the things that you know about cannabis, they don't know. And so maybe their approach is going to be very different. And it's a lot different to market to a heavy consumer, and I feel like that's who the legacy growers are used to selling to. And so if you only focus on them, you're always going to have a very small piece of the market. So
yeah, that's a great point. Just on this last CannabisCMO newsletter, we showed an infographic from New Frontier Data, and they showed an overlaid graph of basically actual cannabis consumers overlaid with who the dispensary visitors are, right? And basically showed that dispensaries are focused on that younger demographic, that sub 34 demographic, when in actuality, you have all of these plus 34s who are not maybe traditional to the legacy marketplaces, but are now coming into the industry and are not being spoken to in the same way. And I think that, like, as you're kind of beginning to talk about, like, if we're only narrowly defining, it's always good to target, and it's good to have buyer personas and understand who your customer is. But if you're only talking to one persona, then you are missing these others who are very curious, especially in new marketplaces. And as this is coming online as a democratization of medicine, that people can actually, look at your dispensary and potentially come in.
100%. And I'm sure that you are planning to bring it up, but another thing that's really important to us is education. And I have this conversation all the time. People are always like, oh yeah, we want to do education, and clients will hire us and say, oh yeah, we want you to do education. And then we'll start to do it. And they're like, oh no, that's, we don't have money for that. Or like, we want to focus on our products. And it's like, oh, you talked a big game about education. I just feel like we're, like, as an industry, we're failing in educating right now. And it's because there isn't a lot of money to invest in education. And I strongly believe that the brands that are investing in education now are going to be the ones that survive. Because there's a huge need for it. There's all these people that we're just talking about that are curious or skeptical or a mixture of both, who need to be educated about the truth. And instead, what they're getting is they go into a dispensary and it's indica versus sativa. And it's not even accurate. So I just, like, yeah, it's just the people that are investing in education now are going to be the winners, I think.
Well, I definitely agree with that. And I think even think from a business efficiency standpoint, this is one of the things I talk with clients about, right? It's like, if you are doing the job of educating your customer before they ever get to your bud tender, you're saving your bud tender time, and you're churning customers a lot quicker, right? So it's not just about this like lofty pie in the sky idea that we just want to educate the world about weed, but it is actually a business thing that, like, if you get them to be closer to making a choice when they're coming to you, you're wasting less of your bud tender's time in doing that education. One way or another, they need to get the education, but if you can provide it to them before they ever reach your bud tender, then you're taking the heat off your bud tender a little bit, and you're actually giving them somebody who's a little bit more educated and can get to a couple layers deeper in that sort of like sales process.
For sure. Yeah.
So I think I'm curious, like, we're obviously talking about brand differentiation, education being one of them. What are some of the other ways that you coach your clients in sort of making sure that they are telling their brand story or that they are differentiating themselves from their competitors, given, like you said, that we are all just selling weed?
Yeah. Well, I like one thing that I am big on is like when you're doing like it's just building it into your branding. Don't chase the stereotypes. Don't like if I see another logo with a cannabis leaf in it, I might gouge my eyes out. Or the puns, the name, like, and I maybe I shouldn't say this because I had one client that had already had their name before they came to us, and it's just a pun on another business, with pot in it, and I was just like, oh, it's too late to fix that, but it's just like, yeah, be be original in your branding. And I think again, if you want to break outside of that narrow stoner heavy cannabis user niche, you need to not lean into those stereotypes. So that would be one of the first things that I would talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. And I feel like, one of the other things that you're kind of like getting at is taking this strategic approach to your brand from the very beginning, right? Because like I deal with, folks who, like you said, they maybe have already come up with a name, they've thrown out a really cheap logo they had a buddy make for $100 and they got their license on it and now they're rocking and rolling. But it's like, is that what you want to be rolling with 10, 15 years from now? Right. And I really think like all of this sort of conversation that we're having right now is really kind of about like taking the time when you're first starting to really lay out that foundation. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean that's yeah, I mean that's why we're trying to reach businesses before they launch, is because this is when you can still fix it. And like when you're talking, another thing that I thought about that I'm always talking about this to clients and potential clients is I know everyone that we work with has a limited budget, whether it's a small, individually owned, 1 or 2 person team or a national level corporation. They're all strapped for marketing dollars. It doesn't matter. And I'm sure 280E is a huge part of that. So what I emphasize is figuring out which assets have the most value to you and invest your money in there to start. And in the same way, figure out which channels you'll be like most effective in reaching your audience, or from 2 ways, because that's where your audience is, or because that's where your personality or abilities lie. And so, for social, for example, like some client, like it's hard to build your marketing through social when you're not allowed to talk about cannabis without getting immediately shadow banned. And so you should only be focusing on that or focusing on video if you have the kind of, like, if you are a personality that wants to be on camera, or you are on social all the time and you like it, then that's where you want to go. But if you're more analytical, maybe you want to focus on SEO, but like figure out, those 2 things. What are the assets that are most value? Like, do you need to build it around your website? Do you need to build it around, do you have a physical location that you need to build that branding and the physical space out? Like figure out where it is that is going to be of most value to you, and then focus there. And for like an example, if you're a grow, where like maybe a website is not that important to you, because your customer is most likely the dispensary as opposed to the end consumer. Your choke point in getting to the market is the buyers at the dispensaries that are deciding whether to carry your flower. And so that's your audience. And so rather than investing in the website, You might want to invest in your sales materials, your brochures, your flyers, and your event, swag and banners and signage that you're going to set up when you go to these B2B events, because that's where you're going to get, a lot of action and ability to get face-to-face time. Or to get the materials into the hands of your salespeople that are going shop to shop around the state. If that's kind of where you're focused, then that's where you want to invest your money. And then you don't want to spend money on a website or your social presence, unless, again, like your social presence is going to be important to you. And I can give you one specific example of a brand. This is not one of our clients. Deschutes Growery, if you're familiar with them, they're a very small grow in Bend, Oregon, but they have a huge presence on social. Their content is amazing, and I got to go to their facility and film them for the Cultivation Classic a few years ago, pre-pandemic, because they won the Resource Innovation Award. And so when I was there and filming them and interviewing the owner, Justin, I was like, who does your social? Because it is amazing. I love all the content that you're doing. He's like, oh, yeah, that's my buddy from snowboarding. Before he started this grow, he was just big into snowboarding. And when he started, he had a friend that was, doing videography for snowboarding. And he's like, hey, I want to hire you. And he hired him for like a full-time salary to just produce his content. And he was early enough in it that the restrictions weren't as bad as they are now on Instagram. So they built up this huge following. And he tells me, I don't have a salesperson on my team because I can walk into every dispensary in the state and they know who we are and they want us, and we sell out every month, right away. And so that's what you're competing with on social. And so if you're not going 100%, don't waste your time. Focus where your strengths are and focus on what's going to move the needle with your, how you're getting your product sold.
Sure. First off, shout out to Deschutes Growery. Those guys are amazing. I pick up their flower regularly from Natural Wonders, my homie Jackson here in town, but definitely love their stuff. And yes, their social is definitely awesome. And I take your point here about sort of like the need to really kind of prioritize where you're investing your time and your resources, right? Especially if you are a small team who's just starting up, doesn't have a full marketing team, doesn't have a budget to hire a full-time videographer, like really, what are the channels? And I think that gets back to something we talk about often here on the show is like, what are your buyer personas? Who are your actual customers? Where do they live? Where are they consuming information and content? And how can you make sure you're getting it out to them? And then that will make it easier to figure out, is it SEO? Is it email? Is it social? Right. And I think that those are all sort of really, really great points there. One of the things I'm also kind of curious about is like, now that we're kind of living through this TikTokification of social media, you see short form videos everywhere. Like, how do you deal with that part of the conversation with clients right now, and kind of understanding that when you're thinking about what's most engaging on social, to your point, how like competitive it is, like, how are you kind of handling that with clients in terms of like focusing on the short form video side of things?
Yeah, I think it depends on, we basically have two approaches. If it's a smaller client, maybe an individual dispensary, a smaller grow, they come to us for social. 90% of the time, we tell them not to hire us or to hire anyone. And we say, do it yourself. Find the person on your team that is an amateur photographer or really likes social, and now they're your social media manager. And you give them an extra couple bucks an hour and you set them loose. And that's the approach I would recommend to, most of the smaller companies. If you're a larger company and you have the budget, then number one, you have to be serious about it, because there's no magic bullet. You can't just throw some money at the beginning and run paid ads, because again, like there are services that can do paid ads on social, and I see them sometimes, and it kind of drives me crazy as I try to figure out how they're getting past the censors to do it. But it's all kind of gimmicky, and you create some landing page that doesn't actually, that redirects to your website, because you can't directly connect your cannabis site to your social. So it's all kind of a whack-a-mole game, and I highly I highly don't recommend it. I don't think that's a sustainable approach. I recommend you focus on organic, and we have worked really hard to figure out how to keep our clients from being shadow banned. And it's a real catch-22. We've gotten very good at it. It usually takes a few months of trial and error, but we have a really good stretch run with our clients of not getting shadow banned. But it's because we don't talk about cannabis, and we don't we don't show product. Not a lot, like, it used to be just don't show consumption. Now we don't show product. And so it's sometimes a tough sell, because people are like, we want to sell. We say, this is what we tell people: decide what your goal is in terms of number of followers, and that depend. Like if you're focused on a city, that may be 5,000 to 10,000. It could be more or less depending on the size of the city that you're in. If you're fully going for a state, or if you're national, especially with some CBD brands, then it's going to obviously be a lot larger. But figure out what that target number is, and until you hit that target number, don't focus on your product. Focus on lifestyle. Figure out what your brand is about. Focus on that lifestyle, and because the only way you're going to grow your number of followers is by not being shadow banned. And so that's how we kind of approach it. So we approach it on don't show cannabis, focus on lifestyle. We have a brand in Seattle, Washington State, and it's a double dispensary. And so we focus on the Pacific Northwest, the outdoors, nature. And so we show a lot of snowboarding and skiing in the winter, and a lot of mountain biking and hiking, and beautiful mountains in both the summer and winter. And so that's the lifestyle that we focus on for that brand. And we try to do that for each one of our clients.
Yeah, I think that's great. If you think of like mainstream brands out there, there's so many that are selling a lifestyle, right? Like very few people are talking about, you're going to mention the ins and outs of your products, but the focus is really on driving an emotion or a sense or a feeling, right? And so I do think like the best brands, no matter what industry you're in, are sort of really driving like, this is who our people are. Do you want to be part of this crew?
Nike doesn't talk about their shoes or their apparel when there's ever, when do you see that? They never do. Food companies, it's a little bit different. And like, ideally you would be able to talk about your cannabis product if you're selling cannabis and what the experience is, but we can't, in a way, like you can't grow your presence and talk about it. And so just focus on like the feeling. What is the vibe? What is your vibe? And that's what you focus on.
And I think another thing that we were kind of talking about a little bit earlier is like, when you can't show the actual consumption, you could still highlight the stories of the people who are consuming, right? Like I envision like a short sort of like reel series where you're having the customer having just consumed the cannabis, then doing an interview, answering some basic questions that are like a kind of like a mini review, right? You're not showing anything on there. You're not talking about actual cannabis there, but you get to see somebody's actual effects from your product, right? So there's sly ways I feel like you can be able to be creative and still be able to get that lifestyle vibe across, get some education across, but not, have to say, hey, come get our 10% off, our edible sale this week.
Yeah, and immediately get kicked off of Instagram for doing so.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what are some other things kind of looking into the future, right? Like I know a lot of people right now are thinking about there's the potential of a Schedule 3 rescheduling, Maybe it allows 280E deductions, which is going to increase marketing budgets. Obviously on the macro, we're seeing like some changes at the federal level slowly happening. So it seems like eventually we're going to have these platforms opening up. You got Twitter last year opening up its advertising platform, LinkedIn being pretty good for cannabis people. What do you kind of see as like kind of some of the emerging trends or ways that the cannabis industry can really start to, take advantage of whatever's coming down the road, even though it's really a roll of the dice what's still to come?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that you know more than I do for sure. Like you're the person I look to for my policy updates. Um, so like I would never paint myself as an expert in that area. I think that like the way we approach it and the way we coach our clients to approach it is just be flexible and focus on the foundation of your brand, because then you're going to be able to adapt to whatever the changes are, you know. Because if you're not flexible and you haven't, like, for an example, if you have invested years in your Instagram and you have 50K, 100K followers, and then you get taken down, you know, I hear from a lot of people that say that's why I don't want to invest in social or in Instagram specifically or whatever it is because, it could just be taken away and then I've invested all that money for nothing. And I don't think that that's true, because if you've done it well, then what you've done, it's not the number of followers, it's the relationship you've built with those followers. And those people, if you've done it well and you invested in your branding and communicating who you are as a brand effectively, then when that account gets taken down and you start a new one or you move into another platform, those people are going to follow you because they built up that relationship and you've invested in that relationship. And in the same way, you have to like build your foundation as a company, as a brand, so that you can adapt to whatever the changes are. Because the one thing we can guarantee is that no one has any idea what's going to happen. And all these predictions, I've been hearing for 7 years since we started in 2017 that, it's going to be federally legal soon. And so, you just, there's no, like the only thing I can say with confidence is someday it will be. Who knows when? But you just have to focus on your branding and you have to focus on your assets and investing wisely in your people, in your efficiencies, in every area. And that will allow you to, just weather whatever storm. So
We are living proof of survival of the fittest here, and I think that is definitely the
Yeah.
mindset you got to have being in this industry. Because yes,
Yeah.
we don't know what's to come from a policy standpoint. I think thinking about kind of like AI and how it's starting to enter the conversation. Even I saw a headline from Meta this week where they said they're going to start tagging AI images inside of Instagram, Facebook, and Threads. So I do think it's going to be interesting. Also, just thinking about some of the macro changes within marketing right now and how we could be taking advantage to build efficiencies into our business, but not become so reliant on any technology or any one channel that if it was turned off, like you're screwed, right? Because I think that's also one of the lessons to be learned in cannabis is like try as many things as you can, figure out the ones you're really good at, and then make sure that you're staying consistent with it. But then also you got to have an escape valve, right? Like at least in this industry, trying to figure out ways that you can make sure you're keeping your control of your contacts and making sure that you have and really owning those relationships and not letting one of these platforms own them for you.
100%. Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned AI, because that's something that we've been focusing a lot on and I've been talking a lot about on social. That's a trend. That's a trend that's a lot, much bigger than the cannabis industry, right? That's a trend that's hitting everything. And I use AI every day. I use ChatGPT. I use Midjourney every day, in so many ways. and um, you have to be using it. You have to be figuring out. There's so many ways that AI is going to touch your business and touch your life, and you need to get on that train as soon as possible, because your competitors are, and those are the people that are going to win. So,
yeah, no doubt. I saw a tweet a while ago from somebody that said, like, it's not people who are going to be replaced by AI. It's people who don't know how to use AI that are going to be replaced by AI,
I'm
right?
pretty sure that was me that said that, because
Well, then, yeah, I mean,
yeah.
like, it's
I mean,
it's
I didn't
spot on.
say it. I was repeating it, but I bet I bet, yeah, I saw it in, like, because it was like an artist. They said AI is not going to replace artists, but artists that are using AI are artists that don't use AI. And I think you can apply that to any industry. Like, if you're not using AI, you're going to get left behind. And it's not that you just are like, flip a switch and now AI is doing it. It's you're integrating it in pieces into a lot of different things.
Yeah,
So
no doubt about it. I mean, like the ability for me to build efficiency and even helping with content calendars for clients, right? So like something that would typically take me days or like maybe a week of spinning out and building 6 months worth of sort of content out,
yeah,
I can at least work with Chat GPT to build that stuff out a lot quicker, then
yeah.
go in and refine it, right? So you're not just kind of
Oh
like copy pasting whatever GPT puts out and like that's it. That's the end of the game. But it does allow you to really build a structure and an outline in a way that you can come back in and really fine tune it so that you're focusing on the things you're really great at, and you can build efficiencies and things that like
yeah,
take a lot of time. And I think that I just literally was doing a training for political campaigns today about using AI in political campaigns, and it's just
yeah,
very much about like starting with a chat GPT account, understanding the technology, starting to play with Midjourney or Dolly, like some of these other sort of things. Cause like even the ability to type out a text and get sort of an image back for someone like me who has no artistic skills, and Canva was a godsend to me to be able to kind of have some sort of ability to put some stuff together. This is really going to take it to the next level. And once again, it's not going to eliminate the need for ever having graphic designers who do really good quality work and have their own creative minds, but it allows you to be able to build even a concept to take to a graphic designer and say, hey, I can't draw something up myself. I want something like this. Can you recreate this image in your style?
100%. And just to give you two examples of how we use it as designers, today I was working on a design brief to give to one of my graphic designers. I started it in ChatGPT. I was like, this is what I need. They wrote the design brief, then it was terrible. And then I just refine it and like, fix this, and then and so instead of me having to type it out, like I'm telling ChatGPT to do it. And then that's allowing me to brainstorm and to think of ideas and to put that in, send it off to my designer. And then he's using it. Almost any like complicated design that you're seeing from us now has some element. Well, one, Adobe has AI design tools built in now. And so you're using it within, and so the difference is that if we just go into Midjourney and they do a prompt, they'll make something really awesome. But it's obvious that it's AI. Even like the most photographic ones, you're still going to be like, oh, that's AI. But what we're doing is, creating design elements or create things that we're pulling into the design, and we're building around the design. For Valentine's Day, we're working on like, two coffee cups with little hearts in the thing with hands holding it. And so like, it's just like, it's just infused in everything that we're doing, and it makes it so much more effective and efficient. And
And I think
one more thing on AI that I think that our customers and the industry as a whole probably isn't aware of, and how it's going to change. But in terms of like inventory management and like handling large amounts of data, like think about how much data is coming out of a grow. Like that's where we're going to be revolutionizing, cannabis science is going to be through AI and inventory management. Like you're going to be able to scale up so much faster and quicker using AI tools to manage your inventory, to best figure out your logistics. That's other ways that they're not the sexy ways that we're seeing in the news all the time, but they may be even more important than some things we were talking about before.
Yeah, no, absolutely. My friend Eli Duffy is working on like a grow bot to where you can put in any information you need and be able to get the information you need out. But I think, yeah, the ability of AI to process large batches of information and then be able to get that down into bite-sized chunks that you can actually work with, I think is huge. And also a great example of how AI has always existed in our lives, but just been operating in the background and we've just never seen it, right? But it really is there to be able to parse down large pieces of information into bite-sized sort of chunks. I think that's a really great example. And one of the things that when you were sort of talking about, how you kind of put in a prompt around like a brief, spit you out something not that great, you're able to kind of go back in there. I think one of the really cool things that also, if you spend enough time with these AI tools, especially ChatGPT, you can teach it, right? And so like being able to say, okay, here's your brief, but here's how I edit it and give it back to you, then ChatGPT is going to be a lot better the next time it spits it out, right? So I think it's also really important for people to understand that like you can on even small levels train the ChatGPT to get better at what you want it to say. And that's why it's really important to become a practitioner, actually get in there and start using it, because it's not ChatGPT for one person can act differently than it will for another person, simply on how that person understands how to use it and the prompts that they're inputting in it. So I think that's a really important point too.
For sure. Yeah.
Well, awesome, Doc. I really appreciate you joining us on Cannabis CMO and sharing some of your knowledge with us. What are any tips or tricks or anything else you want to make sure you're leaving listeners with as they're thinking about content marketing in the cannabis industry?
Yeah, I mean, all I can say is like invest in your brand. Like if I were thinking of starting a business, or I was a cannabis touching business as opposed to a market, or I had have a cannabis touching business. There's two things that I would focus on. One is the efficiency of how you run your operations, and two is your brand. And those are the two most important things that you can invest in. And if you start there, then you see there, then everything else is going to be easy.
Well, that's awesome. And if folks want to get in contact with you or learn more about the Hood Collective, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, our website is hoodcollective.com. My email is doc@hoodcollective.com, so it's really easy. I answer all my emails unless it's spam. And our Instagram is Hood Collective Film. So we're also on YouTube. If you search for, we're really good at SEO. That's the so if you do a search for Hood Collective, you're going to find us pretty easily. So. Yeah.
Well, awesome. I really appreciate you joining us. I'll make sure I drop your contact information in our show notes as well. We appreciate everybody for listening to another episode of Cannabis CMO. Make sure that you're subscribing to our newsletter at cannabiscmo.substack.com. Make sure you're subscribing to everywhere you can find your podcast. Doc, thanks so much for joining us, and everyone else. We'll see you next time on Cannabis CMO.
Thank you, and thank you for all this that you're doing. It's really important for the industry, so I appreciate it.
Of course, brother. Appreciate you. Thank you so much.